The smell of disinfectant never fully leaves you. It soaks into your hair, your jacket lining, the creases of your palms. After 11 years, 4 of them in forward operating bases in Kandahar and Helmand, 7 more in emergency nursing at Montfort, Lennox had stopped noticing it. The smell was just part of what she was. A Wednesday night in January, -19 outside, and the ER was doing what it always did in deep winter, filling slowly, steadily, with the cold and the forgotten. She was charting a discharge at the nurse's station when the sliding doors opened and let in a wall of frozen air. The man who came through them was not walking so much as listing. He had the particular gait of someone running entirely on adrenaline and stubbornness. Someone whose body had checked out hours ago, but whose mind had not yet received the memo. He was wearing a heavy canvas work coat, the kind that costs $40 at a farm supply store and lasts a decade. It was soaked through. His boots left a trail of slush across the freshly mopped tile. He was carrying a child. Lennox was already up before the thought fully formed, her brain switching into the cold, quiet mode she'd learned to call on in Helmand when the helicopters came in too fast and too full. She was pulling gloves from the wall dispenser, snapping them over her wrists, moving toward him. The child turned out to be a boy. Maybe 8 years old. He was limp, his head lolling against the man's shoulder, his lips the color of a bruise. His snowsuit was unzipped, and one arm, the left, was wrapped in what looked like a torn flannel shirt soaked almost entirely red. He fell through the ice, the man said. His voice had nothing left in it. On the river. I got him out, but there was something underneath a piece of rebar, old bridge. I don't know. It went through his forearm. He's been conscious. He wasn't conscious in the truck. Lennox looked at the boy's face. His lashes were still frosted. Bay 2, she said. Now, move. She was already calling back over her shoulder for Tran, her charge nurse that night, to get a trauma cart and call pediatrics. Tran appeared in the corridor, took one look at the boy's arm, and started moving. The two of them worked around the man, who set the child on the exam table with a gentleness that didn't belong in the same universe as how destroyed he looked. The rebar had missed the radial artery by less than a centimeter. Lennox knew this because she could see the vessel pulsing faintly alongside the wound, intact, not severed, but the tissue damage around it was significant, and the boy had lost blood. She started packing the wound, layering pressure, calling out orders without looking up. The boy stirred and made a sound low in his throat. His eyes opened halfway. You're in the hospital, Lennox said, not pausing. Your dad's right there. You're okay. Stay still. The boy's eyes drifted to the man. The man reached out and took his good hand. I've got you, Marcus, he said. I've got you. Tran had the IV line in fast and clean, and the boy, Marcus, had calmed by the time Lennox stepped back to assess. Pediatric surgery was on their way down. The wound was controlled. He was going to need a proper repair in the OR, but he was stable, he was warm, he was going to be fine. She was stripping off her first pair of gloves when the door opened and Dr. Arsenault came in. Not the pediatric surgeon. Arsenault was the department medical director, and he was wearing the expression he always wore when something had happened that he intended to make someone else responsible for. Nurse Lennox. He said her name the way people say the name of a problem they've just identified. Can I speak with you outside for a moment? She looked at Marcus. She looked at the father. Tran caught her eye and gave a small nod. I've got this. Lennox followed Arsenault into the corridor. He didn't pace. Arsenault was not a pacer. He stood with his arms folded, and spoke in the measured, reasonable tone of a man who had practiced sounding reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "The boy's father is not insured," Arsenault said. "He's a non-resident, landed immigrant, work visa, been here 18 months. His son has no provincial health coverage. Now, that doesn't mean we turn him away. We're not going to do that. But it does mean that the level of resource deployment needs to be assessed before we escalate to surgical." Lennox stared at him. "The wound is deep tissue. He needs an OR. He needs the wound stabilized, and then a transfer to a facility that has a charitable care arrangement we can bill against. I've already called Queensway. They have a pediatric surgery slot tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Lennox repeated. "The wound is packed. It's controlled. He's not in immediate danger. He's 8 years old and he has soft tissue damage adjacent to a major vessel after 40 minutes in ice water. He needs surgery tonight." Arsenault's face didn't change. "The resource allocation decision is mine to make, Lennox. I've made it. Get the boy stable for transport and document accordingly." She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped its slow, even rhythm. She thought about the boy's lashes, still frosted when he came in. She thought about what tomorrow morning meant for a wound like that, the risk of compartment syndrome, of infection, of a cascade that didn't need to happen. She thought about her license. She went back into Bay 2. Tran looked up. The father looked up. Marcus was watching the ceiling with the vague, medicated calm of a child who has decided that whatever the adults are doing, it must be under control. "What did he say?" Tran asked quietly. "He said to stabilize for transfer." Tran's expression said everything. Lennox pulled up the surgical consult on the chart. Dr. Chow from pediatric surgery had been paged. She looked at the timestamp. Chow had acknowledged the page 6 minutes ago. She picked up the phone at the bedside and called up to the surgical floor directly. Chow answered on the second ring. "It's Lennox in the ER. I have a pediatric soft tissue trauma, 7-centimeter laceration, deep tissue involvement, possible neurovascular proximity. The patient is 8 years old, post-hypothermia, hemodynamically stable, but this is going to need a repair tonight." There was a brief pause. "I'll come down and assess. Thank you." She hung up. She was aware, as she did it, that she was going around Arsenault. She was aware that Arsenault was going to find out. She was also aware that the boy on the table had a left hand he would need for the rest of his life, and that the rest of his life was going to be a very long time if they did this correctly tonight. Chow came down in 11 minutes. She was a small, precise woman who looked at wounds, the way mechanics look at engines, not with emotion, but with the calm, proprietary attention of someone who knows exactly what she's dealing with. She examined the boy's arm for 4 minutes without speaking. Then she straightened up and said, "We'll take him up at 2100. I'll need the OR prepped." The father let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. Lennox was back at the nurse's station, updating the chart when Arsenault appeared beside her. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was one of the things about him. "I gave you a direct instruction," he said. "The patient presented with indicators for urgent surgical intervention. I initiated a consult pursuant to triage protocol. You went around my decision. I followed clinical guidelines." Arsenault was quiet for a moment. "This conversation is going to continue," he said. "You understand that? I understand that." He walked away. Lennox looked at her chart. Her hands were steady. She had steadier hands than most people she knew. which was one of the reasons she'd lasted 4 years in places where the supply helicopters were sometimes late, and the alternative to steady hands was a body bag. She was not unaware that steady hands did not protect you from administrative consequences. She was not unaware that Arsenault had the ear of the department head, and the department head had his name on the budget line that included her position. She finished the chart entry and went to check on Marcus before they took him up. He was awake now, properly awake, with the slightly too bright eyes of a child who had been scared and was processing it. His father was sitting in the chair beside the bed, still in his wet coat. He hadn't taken it off. Lennox didn't think he'd let himself stop long enough to notice he was cold. "Surgery's going to happen tonight," she told them. "Dr. Chow is excellent. She'll repair the tissue properly, and you won't lose any function." The father looked at her. He had a face that had been weathered early, the kind of face you got from outdoor work, from years of squinting into wind. His eyes were dark and exhausted and absolutely present. "They almost didn't do it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "It's happening," Lennox said. "Because of you." She didn't answer that. She adjusted the blanket around Marcus's shoulders and said, "Someone's going to come down soon to take him up. Do you want a coffee? There's a machine at the end of the hall." "I'm fine. You've been in a wet coat for 2 hours." He looked down at himself like he'd only just noticed. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "I'll find a coffee," he said. She nodded and left them. The shift went on. It always did. A man with a dislocated shoulder. A teenager who'd taken the wrong combination of things at a party and needed monitoring. A woman in her 70s with what turned out to be a minor cardiac event, caught early, treated, transferred upstairs with the odds in her favor. Lennox moved through all of it with the economy of motion she'd developed over years of working in spaces where there was never enough room and never enough time. At 11:47, she was in the supply room, doing an inventory count she'd been putting off for 2 weeks when Tran found her. Arsenault filed a formal complaint with the charge coordinator, Tran said. "You're suspended pending review." Lennox set down the box of IV supplies she was holding. "When?" "Coordinator called for you about 20 minutes ago. I said you were with a patient. She's at the desk." Lennox walked out of the supply room. The coordinator, a woman named Patel she'd dealt with before, was waiting with the expression of someone who had drawn the short straw on a difficult task. She handed Lennox a printed form, the kind that comes with a sequence number and a reference to the relevant section of the hospital's HR policy manual. "Effective immediately," Patel said, "pending the outcome of the formal review." "I'm sorry, Lena." Lennox looked at the form. Inappropriate clinical escalation. Failure to follow direct instruction from supervising physician. Conduct contrary to departmental resource allocation protocol. She looked at the date and time stamp at the top of the form. Marcus had been in the OR for 50 minutes. The repair was almost certainly underway. She handed the form back. "Keep it," she said. "I'll need a copy for my union rep." Patel nodded. "Of course." Lennox went to the locker room. She changed out of her scrubs into the jeans and sweater she'd come in, wearing, folded the scrubs into her bag. She took her stethoscope off the hook inside the locker door. She had 2 stethoscopes, a good one she'd bought herself, and the basic one the hospital had issued her on her first day. She took the good one. The hospital could keep the other. She was zipping her bag closed when she thought, without meaning to, about Hellmand, about a specific afternoon in a forward aid station. When the protocol said they were supposed to wait for the medevac, and the medevac was 40 minutes out, and there was a corporal on the floor of the tent with a tension pneumothorax that was going to kill him in the next 8 if someone didn't decompress it. She decompressed it. She'd done it with what she had, and she'd done it correctly, and the corporal had made it to Kandahar airfield alive. Nobody had filed a formal complaint about that one. She shouldered her bag and walked out through the main floor. The ER was quieter now, that particular 2 a.m., quiet that felt like the whole building exhaling. She passed the nurse's station. Tran looked up. Lennox gave her a small nod. Tran gave one back. She was almost at the exit doors when a voice behind her said, "You're the nurse." She turned around. There were 4 of them. They'd come in through the main entrance without her noticing, which meant she'd been more inside her own head than she'd realized. They were dressed in civilian clothes. Heavy winter jackets, work boots, the kind of clothing that doesn't announce itself, but they stood the way a certain type of person stands. Weight distributed, hands loose, eyes that had already taken inventory of every exit in the room within 10 seconds of walking through the door. The one who had spoken was a woman. She was roughly Lennox's age, maybe a few years older, with the compact, deliberate physicality of someone who had spent years in very small spaces making very fast decisions. She had a scar along her left jaw that had been stitched in a hurry and healed at an angle. "I'm a nurse," Lennox said, "the one who got the boy into surgery tonight." Lennox looked at her. "Who are you? My name is Varga." She said it the way you say a thing that is simply a fact. "That boy's father is my team. His name is Devereux. He was in 3 PPCLI before he came home. Before the visa, before the ice, before tonight." She paused. "He called me from the waiting room." Lennox looked past Varga at the 3 others. One of them she clocked as ex-military in under 2 seconds. The posture, the economy, the way he was watching the room rather than the conversation. The others she wasn't as sure about, but they had the same quality of attentiveness, the kind that doesn't come from an office. "He told me what the doctor tried to do," Varga said, "and what you did instead." "I followed clinical protocol," Lennox said. The answer was automatic, flat, the same one she'd given Arsenault. Varga looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was not unkind, but was very direct. "You're leaving." Lennox looked down at the bag on her shoulder. "Suspended. Because of tonight. Because of tonight." Varga turned and said something quietly to the man on her left. He nodded once and took out a phone. Then Varga looked back at Lennox and said, "Where is this Arsenault?" "You can't. I'm not going to touch him," Varga said, and her voice was so matter-of-fact that it was somehow more convincing than a reassurance would have been. "I just want to have a conversation." As if on cue, or perhaps because he'd been watching from the corridor and chose exactly the wrong moment to reassert his authority. Arsenault came through the double doors from the inner ER. He was holding a coffee cup and had the slightly flushed look of a man who had been making phone calls. He stopped when he saw the 4 people standing in the middle of his lobby. "Can I help you?" His voice carried the automatic confidence of a man who was used to being the most credentialed person in any room. Varga turned to face him. She didn't square up, didn't posture. She just turned, and something about the quality of her attention made the air in the room change. "You're the medical director," she said. "I am, and visiting ours, the boy in OR 2, Marcus Devereux. His father is Corporal Theo Devereux, 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2 tours in Kandahar. Medically released in 2019 after an IED strike took 60% of the hearing in his right ear and left him with a TBI he spent 3 years rehabbing. She said this without consulting anything. She said it the way you say things you know because you were there. He came home. He got a work visa. He got a job. He got his son enrolled in school. He did everything right. And tonight, his son fell through ice on the Rideau and got hurt. And your nurse kept that boy's hand functional because she understood that tomorrow morning is not a medical decision. It's an administrative one. Arsenault's jaw tightened. The resource allocation. I have a friend at the Ottawa Citizen. The man on Varga's left said. He hadn't looked up from his phone. I also have a friend who covers Veterans Affairs for CBC. I'm trying to decide which one this story fits better. He finally looked up. Canadian veteran, work visa, can't access his kid's emergency surgery because of a hospital administrator's coverage policy. I think it might be both, honestly. The color in Arsenault's face shifted. He was smart enough to understand what that meant. Not just a news cycle, but the particular kind of news cycle that attached a name to a decision and made it very difficult to walk that decision back quietly. This is highly irregular, Arsenault said, but the authority had gone out of it. The nurse, Varga said, her suspension, that is an internal HR matter, and it's not her suspension. Varga said again. There was a long silence. Lennox was aware that the night receptionist had stopped pretending to look at her screen. Tran was standing in the corridor entrance with the stillness of someone watching something they want to remember accurately. Arsenault set his coffee cup down on the edge of the reception desk. He looked at Lennox. The look he gave her was not one she would forget quickly. It was the look of a man calculating, not relenting, which meant that whatever came next would have strings attached that she'd feel later. But the calculation went where the calculation had to go. The suspension, he said slowly, is under review. He looked back at Varga. Given the circumstances, I'll be recommending to HR that the complaint be withdrawn pending the formal outcome of the surgical case. Varga held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she nodded once and looked back at Lennox. Lennox had not moved from where she was standing. She looked at Arsenault. She looked at the form she'd folded into the front pocket of her jacket, next to her phone. You'll want to document that, she said to him. Tonight, not tomorrow. Something moved across his face. Of course, he said. He picked up his coffee cup and walked back through the double doors. The lobby went back to being a lobby. The receptionist's keyboard started clicking again. Tran disappeared back toward the nurse's station. Varga walked over to Lennox. Up close, Lennox could see that the scar along her jaw had a small puckered section at one end where the original closure had been done field style, the stitch pattern tight and economical. Someone who knew what they were doing but didn't have the tools for cosmetics. Devereux said you were with the CF, Varga said. Lennox hadn't said so. She wasn't sure how she'd read it, but she had. Nursing officer? Medical tech, forward, Lennox said. Helmand, then Kandahar, 2010 to 2014. Varga nodded as if that explained something. He also said you told him Marcus wasn't going to lose function. He wanted to know if that was true or if you were just saying it. Lennox thought about the wound, about Chow's assessment, the precision of her hands as she'd examined the tissue. It's true, she said. Dr. Chow is the best hand surgeon in this hospital, and the rebar missed the radial artery. The repair will be clean. Marcus will have full function. Varga looked at her for a moment, then, good, she turned to go. Varga, Lennox said. Varga turned back. Your jaw. That closure was done in field conditions. A beat. It was. There's a scar revision clinic here. plastic surgery outpatient. Good results. Varga's mouth moved in something that might have been the beginning of a smile and then decided against it. I'll look into it, she said. She and her team moved toward the exit. Their boots made the same even, synchronized sound on the tile that they had when they'd come in. The doors opened. The January air came in cold and clean and metallic, the smell of a city midwinter, and then the doors closed and they were gone. Lennox stood in the lobby for a moment. The bag was still on her shoulder. She was still in her street clothes. She looked down at herself and then looked at the double doors that led back to the ER. She went to the locker room and put her scrubs back on. She washed her hands at the deep utility sink, watching the last faint trace of the evening swirl down the drain. The soap was the industrial kind, slightly gritty, the smell of it so embedded in her daily life that she barely registered it anymore. She dried her hands on the rough paper towel and looked at herself in the mirror. Above the sink for a moment, she looked tired. She looked the way she always looked at 2 a.m. on a winter shift. She didn't look like someone who had won something, because she wasn't sure she had. Arsenault would remember this. There would be other forms, other conversations, other moments when an administrator with a long memory and a budget line would find a way to make the ledger balance on his terms. But Marcus Devereaux was in an OR upstairs, with the best hand surgeon in the building, and in the morning he was going to wake up, and his left hand was going to work, and in a year he was going to have forgotten most of this night, except maybe the cold of the water and the warm weight of his father's arms pulling him out of it. She walked back out to the floor. Tran was at the station, updating a chart. "You're back," Tran said, not looking up. "I'm back. Paramedics are 10 minutes out. Highway 417, multi-vehicle, 2 priority ones." Lennox pulled a fresh pair of gloves from the box on the counter and snapped them over her wrists. She felt the familiar cold clarity settle in, the same thing that settled in every time, the thing she had never found a name for that wasn't inadequate. "Which bay?" she said. 1 and 3. "I'll take 1, she said, and she went to meet them.